Have you ever walked into a room and felt like someone was silently rooting for your failure? Not loudly, not obviously, but subtly, strategically, almost invisibly. Narcissistic people rarely say, "I want to destroy you." Instead, they erode you, they undermine you. They try to erase your confidence, your voice, your identity, until the person you once were disappears. When a narcissist wants to control someone, they rarely begin with open hostility. They begin with something much quieter, much more subtle, and far more dangerous. They attack your confidence. Not all at once, not in a way that is obvious, but slowly, strategically, like water dripping on stone until the stone begins to crack. You might remember the beginning of the relationship or interaction. Maybe you were excited about something in your life, a new idea, a career opportunity, a passion project, or simply a moment where you felt proud of who you were becoming. You shared that joy, expecting support, maybe even celebration, but instead, the narcissist leaned back, tilted their head, and delivered something that sounded like concern but felt strangely cold. Are you sure you can handle that? Or, people like you usually struggle with things like that. At first, it confuses you. You tell yourself they're just being honest. Maybe they're trying to help you stay grounded. But over time, those comments start appearing everywhere. When you succeed, they minimize it. When you fail, they magnify it. When you try something new, they predict disaster before you even begin. Slowly, without realizing it, you start shrinking your own ambitions just to avoid the next discouraging remark. This is not accidental. Narcissists understand something very important about human psychology. A confident person is extremely difficult to control. Someone who believes in themselves will question manipulation. They will set boundaries. They will walk away when they recognize disrespect. And that is exactly what the narcissist cannot allow. So they start dismantling your confidence piece by piece. Imagine a young professional who lands an incredible job opportunity. Instead of celebrating, the narcissistic partner might say, "That company hires anyone these days." Or when a student earns top grades, a narcissistic parent might shrug and say, "Let's see if you can keep it up." These comments seem small in isolation, but when they happen again and again, they create an invisible weight. The person begins to doubt their own capabilities. They hesitate. They second-guess themselves. And this is the tragedy of narcissistic erosion. It doesn't just affect your achievements, it affects how you see yourself. The voice that once lived outside of you, the one criticizing, doubting, mocking, slowly moves inside your own mind. Suddenly you hear it before you take a risk. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'll fail. Maybe they were right about me. But here's the truth. Narcissists hope you never discover. Their criticism is not a reflection of your limitations. It is a reflection of their insecurity. Your confidence reminds them of everything they are afraid they are not. Your growth threatens their fragile sense of superiority. So they try to dim your light, not because it's weak, but because it shines too brightly for them to tolerate. The moment you recognize this pattern, something powerful happens. You begin to see the strategy behind the words. You realize those little comments were never harmless. They were attempts to reshape how you see yourself. And once you understand that, you can start reclaiming the one thing narcissists fear most, your belief in your own worth. Because when your confidence returns, their power disappears, and the person they were trying to erase becomes stronger than ever. There is a moment in many people's lives when something good finally begins to happen. Maybe it's the phone call offering a new job. Maybe it's the business idea that starts gaining traction. Maybe it's a new relationship, a creative project, or a dream that has been waiting years to breathe. You feel the excitement rising inside you. You feel possibility. You feel momentum. And naturally, you turn to someone close to you to share that moment. But if that person is a narcissist, something strange happens. Instead of encouragement, you feel a shift in the air. The energy changes. Their smile tightens. Their tone becomes colder. Suddenly, the celebration you expected becomes interrogation. Are you sure that's a good idea? That company doesn't have a good reputation. People like you usually burn out trying things like that. At first, it might seem like concern. It might sound like caution. But over time, you start noticing a pattern that is impossible to ignore. Every time your life begins to move forward, every time an opportunity appears that could expand your independence, confidence, or happiness, the narcissist becomes the loudest voice of doubt in the room. This is not coincidence. It is strategy. Narcissists feel threatened by the growth of the people around them. Your success represents something deeply uncomfortable for them, a shift in power. When you grow, when you achieve, when you discover your capabilities, you become harder to control. You become less dependent on their approval. You start seeing the world as bigger than the narrow space they want to keep you in. So instead of supporting your opportunities, they begin to sabotage them. Sometimes the sabotage is emotional. Right before an important interview, they might start an argument that drains your energy. Right before a big presentation, they might plant seeds of doubt that make your mind spiral with anxiety. At other times, the sabotage is more subtle. They might discourage you from networking with people who could help you grow. They might question your readiness so often that you begin to hesitate, delaying opportunities until they slip away. Consider the person who is about to launch a business they have worked on for years. The narcissistic partner doesn't celebrate the courage it took to reach that moment. Instead, they start predicting failure. Most businesses collapse in the first year. You're risking everything. What if you embarrass yourself? Slowly, the excitement that once fueled the dream begins to shrink under the weight of those words. But here's the truth that changes everything. The narcissist is not reacting to your weakness. They are reacting to your potential. Your opportunities represent freedom. They represent expansion. They represent a life where your identity is no longer defined by their approval. And that possibility terrifies someone who depends on control to feel powerful. The moment you begin to recognize this pattern, your perspective shifts. You start to see that their negativity was never objective advice. It was resistance. It was an attempt to slow you down, to make you doubt the very path that could lead you to a stronger, more independent life. And when you understand that, something powerful happens inside you. Instead of shrinking when opportunities appear, you lean toward them even more. You protect them. You nurture them. You stop asking permission from someone whose greatest fear is your success. Because every opportunity you pursue is not just a step toward achievement, it is a step toward reclaiming your autonomy, your confidence, and your future. And that is the one thing a narcissist cannot control. One of the most powerful things a human being can have in their life is good support. Friends who listen when life gets heavy, family members who remind you who you are when you forget, mentors who guide you when the road ahead looks uncertain. Healthy relationships create a circle of strength around you. They remind you that you are not alone in the world, and that circle of support is exactly what a narcissist wants to break, because a narcissist understands something very important. People who are supported are much harder to control. So the isolation doesn't start dramatically. It doesn't begin with a command like, "You're not allowed to see them." Instead, it begins with subtle comments that plant seeds of doubt in your mind. Maybe you mention meeting a friend for coffee, and the narcissist casually says, "I don't think that friend really cares about you the way you think they do." You talk about visiting family, and they respond, "Your family always judges you. Why do you keep going back to them?" At first, you brush it off, but those comments keep coming, again and again. Slowly, they start reshaping how you see the people around you. The narcissist becomes the voice interpreting everyone else's intentions. They're jealous of you. They're trying to use you. They're talking about you behind your back. And here's where the manipulation becomes dangerous. Over time, you start pulling away from the very people who once gave you strength. The weekly phone calls become less frequent. The invitations to gatherings start getting declined. The friendships that once energized you begin to fade into the background of your life. Meanwhile, the narcissist positions themselves as the only person you can truly trust. They might say things like, "At least you know I'm honest with you." Or, "Everyone else will leave eventually, but I'm the one who stays." It sounds comforting in the moment, but it is actually the final step in a carefully built trap. Because once your world becomes smaller, your dependence on them becomes larger. Imagine someone who once had a vibrant social life, friends they could laugh with, family members they could turn to when things went wrong. But after years of subtle manipulation, those connections weaken. The narcissist becomes the central voice in their life, the one defining reality, offering opinions, shaping decisions. And when conflicts happen, there are fewer outside perspectives to challenge the narcissist's narrative. This is why isolation is such a powerful tool of control. When people are cut off from their support systems, they start believing that the narcissist's version of reality is the only version that exists. But here is the powerful truth. Isolation only works when you don't recognize it. The moment you see the pattern, everything changes. You begin reconnecting with the people who remind you of your strength. You rebuild relationships that were pushed to the side. You start listening to voices that uplift rather than diminish you. And when that circle of support returns, something incredible happens. The narcissist's influence begins to weaken. Their words lose their power because they are no longer the only voice you hear. You remember that you belong to a world much bigger than the one they tried to shrink around you. A world filled with people who celebrate your growth, who stand beside you in difficult moments, and who remind you that your life was never meant to revolve around someone else's control. And once that realization takes hold, the walls of isolation begin to crumble. There is a moment that many people who have dealt with narcissistic behavior remember with painful clarity. It's the moment when they begin to question their own mind. They remember something vividly, a conversation, a promise, a hurtful comment. Yet when they bring it up, the narcissist looks at them with complete confidence and says, "That never happened." At first it feels confusing. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe you misheard something, but then it happens again, and again, and again. The same pattern repeats until something unsettling begins to take root inside you. Doubt. This is the psychological tactic known as gaslighting, and it is one of the most disorienting tools a narcissist can use. Instead of simply disagreeing with you, they begin rewriting reality itself. They challenge your memory, your perception, and eventually your sense of judgment. Imagine someone confronting a narcissistic partner about a cruel remark made during an argument. They clearly remember the words, the tone, the sting of humiliation. But when they bring it up later, the narcissist responds with absolute certainty. "I never said that. You're being dramatic." Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about the hurtful comment. It's about whether your memory can even be trusted. Over time, this becomes a pattern that reshapes the psychological landscape of the relationship. When you express concern about something they did, they say you're too sensitive. When you recall a specific event, they claim you're remembering it wrong. When you point out inconsistencies, they accuse you of creating problems that don't exist. And slowly, something very powerful begins to break down inside you. Human beings rely on their perception of reality to navigate the world. Your memory, your intuition, your interpretation of events, these are the internal compasses that guide your decisions. But when someone repeatedly tells you those compasses are faulty, you begin to hesitate before trusting them. You start second-guessing yourself. You replay conversations in your head, wondering if you misunderstood something obvious. You start asking for reassurance about things you once felt confident about. Sometimes you even apologize for situations where you were actually the one being wronged. That is the true damage of gaslighting. It doesn't just confuse you in the moment, it slowly disconnects you from your own internal authority. Consider someone in a workplace environment where a narcissistic boss constantly denies instructions they previously gave. The employee follows the directions carefully, only to later be told, "I never asked you to do that." After enough of these experiences, the employee stops trusting their own understanding and begins relying entirely on the boss's version of events. That is exactly the dynamic the narcissist wants. But here is the empowering truth that begins the process of reclaiming your clarity. Gaslighting only works when you believe the narrative being imposed on you. The moment you begin recognizing the pattern, the fog starts to lift. You realize that the confusion you felt was not evidence of your weakness or instability. It was evidence of manipulation. Your memories matter. Your perceptions matter. Your instincts matter. And when you start honoring those internal signals again, something remarkable happens. The power of the gaslighter begins to dissolve. Their attempts to distort reality lose their grip because you stop outsourcing your understanding of the world to someone whose goal was never truth. It was control. When you reclaim trust in your own mind, you reclaim the foundation of your independence. And once that foundation is restored, no one can rewrite your reality ever again. One of the most unsettling moments in dealing with a narcissist is the day you realize something doesn't feel right when you are hurting. Normally, when a human being sees someone they care about in pain, a natural response appears: concern, empathy, compassion. It might be a comforting word, a reassuring hand on the shoulder, or simply the quiet presence of someone who wants you to feel less alone. That is the language of healthy relationships. But with a narcissist, the emotional atmosphere can feel disturbingly different. You might experience a difficult setback. Maybe you lose an opportunity you worked hard for. Maybe you're going through a personal struggle. Maybe something deeply important to you falls apart. In that vulnerable moment, you turn toward the narcissist expecting understanding. But instead of warmth, you sense something cold beneath the surface. Maybe they dismiss your feelings. Maybe they change the subject quickly. Or sometimes, if you watch closely enough, you see something even more disturbing: a flicker of satisfaction. Not always openly, not always dramatically, but in subtle ways that leave you feeling confused and unsettled. This reaction reveals something fundamental about narcissistic psychology. Narcissists often measure their worth by comparison. They constantly scan the world around them, asking one silent question: who is above me and who is below me? And when they see someone else succeed, especially someone close to them, it can trigger deep feelings of envy and insecurity. Your happiness, your growth, your achievements, these things can feel threatening to someone who needs to believe they are superior. So when life knocks you down, the narcissist may feel a twisted sense of relief. Your pain restores the hierarchy they are desperate to maintain. If you stumble, they feel taller. If you struggle, they feel more powerful. Your suffering becomes confirmation of the story they tell themselves. I'm better, I'm stronger, I'm the one in control. Imagine someone who has been working toward a promotion for months, long hours, late nights, endless effort. The opportunity is important not just for their career, but for their sense of progress in life. Then one day they learn they didn't get it. It's disappointing, painful, and disorienting. They come home and share the news with the narcissistic partner. Instead of empathy, the response might sound like this: well, maybe you weren't ready for that level anyway. Or, honestly, you've been too ambitious lately. Those words might be delivered calmly, even casually, but underneath them is a quiet reinforcement of the narcissist's internal script, the script where you remain smaller and they remain superior. Over time, this dynamic creates a deep emotional wound, because pain is supposed to be the moment when people show you who truly cares. When someone instead responds with indifference or subtle satisfaction, it shakes your sense of trust in the relationship. But here is the truth that can begin to free you from this toxic dynamic. Their reaction to your pain does not define your value. It reveals their emotional limitations. Your struggles, your setbacks, your moments of vulnerability are part of being human. They are not evidence that you deserve to feel small. They are experiences meant to be met with understanding and support, not silent competition. The moment you recognize this pattern, you begin to stop seeking empathy from someone incapable of giving it. You start turning toward people who celebrate your victories and stand beside you in your difficult moments. And when you surround yourself with people who genuinely want to see you rise, the narcissist's quiet satisfaction loses its power. Because your life is no longer measured by their distorted sense of superiority. Your journey continues upward, regardless of whether they clap for you or not. There comes a moment in many narcissistic relationships when the dynamic begins to change. The manipulation stops working as easily as it once did. The person they tried to control starts asking questions. Boundaries begin to appear. Confidence slowly returns. And when a narcissist senses that they are losing their grip, something very dangerous can happen. They shift from controlling you privately to attacking you publicly. This is where the smear campaign begins. A smear campaign is not loud at first. It doesn't start with obvious accusations shouted across a room. It begins quietly, behind closed doors, through whispers and carefully planted stories. The narcissist starts talking about you to others, but not in a way that reveals their true motives. Instead, they disguise it as concern. I'm worried about them lately. They've been acting really unstable. I've tried so hard to help, but nothing works. On the surface, it sounds sympathetic, but underneath, something very calculated is happening. They are shaping the narrative before you even realize there is a narrative being created. Imagine someone who finally decides to distance themselves from a narcissistic friend or partner after years of manipulation. They start rebuilding their independence, reconnecting with supportive people, and refusing to tolerate disrespect. But while they are quietly healing, the narcissist is already working behind the scenes. They may begin telling mutual friends that you are difficult, dramatic, or ungrateful. They might twist past events to make themselves look like the victim, and you like the aggressor. By the time you realize what is happening, the ground beneath your reputation may already feel unstable. People look at you differently. Conversations feel awkward. Someone mentions a rumor you never imagined could exist. And suddenly, you're not just dealing with the emotional aftermath of the relationship. You're dealing with a distorted story about who you are. This tactic serves two purposes for the narcissist. First, it protects their ego. If you leave or challenge them, they cannot tolerate the idea that their behavior caused it, so they rewrite the story where you are the problem. Second, it isolates you further. If others begin believing the narrative they created, you may feel alone, misunderstood, even silenced. But here is the powerful truth that narcissists hope you never realize. A smear campaign is often the clearest evidence that you have stopped playing their game. Healthy people do not need to destroy someone's reputation to maintain their own dignity. When someone launches a campaign to discredit you, it reveals more about their character than it ever could about yours. Think about individuals throughout life who faced unfair criticism, rumors, or misrepresentation. Many of them eventually discovered that the most powerful response was not to chase every lie or defend themselves against every whisper. The most powerful response was to continue living with integrity, to keep building their life, their work, their relationships, their truth. Because time has a remarkable way of exposing patterns, people eventually notice who spreads negativity and who lives with consistency. They observe who creates drama and who moves forward with purpose. And when that contrast becomes clear, the false narratives begin to collapse under their own weight. If you ever find yourself targeted by a smear campaign, remember this. Your reputation is not defined by someone else's story. It is defined by the life you continue to live. You do not need to shrink your voice to satisfy someone who fears your independence. You do not need to carry the burden of defending yourself against every falsehood. Your strength lies in continuing to grow, continuing to rise, and continuing to live in a way that reflects who you truly are. And in the long run, truth has a way of standing taller than any lie ever told.